My name is Ellie, and I'm 29 years old. The night my entire life changed started with the turn of a key in a lock that was finally mine. It ended in a silence that was louder than any argument I'd ever had. The scent of fresh paint filled my dream home, a space I had sacrificed for 5 years to finally call my own. Balloons spelling home bobbed on the staircase. The kitchen counters were a feast of my family's favorite foods. My dad's favorite dip, my mom's favorite pie. Every detail a plea for them to finally celebrate me. I invited everyone, my parents, my siblings, the whole family. They all said they'd come. But as the hours ticked by, the silence in the house grew into a roar. The food grew cold, my phone remained dark, and the driveway stayed empty. The doorbell never rang. Not one person showed up for the biggest night of my life. And in the quiet, echoing rooms of my greatest achievement, I received their final, clearest message. Their absence wasn't an accident. It was their answer. Before I tell you how everything flipped, please like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. Growing up in our small Indiana ranch house was an exercise in learning the physics of emotional space. I learned that my brother and sister were like stars, possessing a gravitational pull that warped the household around them, while I was more like a satellite, orbiting at a distance, noticed only when I passed through their light. The house itself felt symbolic of this dynamic. It had 3 bedrooms, but in reality it felt like it had 2 and a storage closet. My parents had their room, a sanctuary of quiet authority. My brother Mark had his own room, a chaotic kingdom of sports posters and unwashed clothes that was celebrated as a boy being a boy. And then there was the room my sister, Jenna, and I shared, which was less a shared space and more a territory she had conquered, an invisible line, as clear to me as if it were drawn in permanent marker. Split the room in 2. Her side was a curated shrine to her own budding genius. My mother had insisted on buying her a proper desk, a delicate, whitewashed wood piece where she could do her creative work. Above it, her wall was a mosaic of achievements, each one framed and precisely hung by my father. There were her charcoal sketches of dramatic, pensive faces, her watercolors of hazy landscapes, and of course, the ever-growing collection of ribbons from her ballet competitions, blue, red, and gold, cascading from her bedpost like a waterfall of validation. My side of the room was comparatively barren. I had a simple bed and a shared dresser where my clothes were crammed into the bottom 2 drawers. My wall was empty, not for lack of trying. When I was 9, I'd taped up a drawing I'd done of the solar system, each planet carefully colored and labeled. I was proud of it. The next day, I came home from school to find it gone. When I asked my mom where it went, she waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, honey, it was getting curly at the edges. It looked a little messy next to Jenna's nice frames." Messy. My passion was messy. The arrival of the piano was the moment the family dynamic was cast in stone. Jenna, at age 10, had declared a fleeting interest in learning to play. For my parents, this was a proclamation from on high. Our second car, a beat-up but functional station wagon my dad used for errands, was sold within a week. In its place appeared a towering, polished, upright piano that consumed a third of our small living room. It loomed over our family life, a constant, gleaming reminder of Jenna's importance. Mrs. Gable, a stern woman with a permanent look of disappointment, began coming twice a week for Jenna's lessons. My mother would sit on the sofa during these sessions, her hands folded in her lap, a look of profound adoration on her face as Jenna plinked her way through "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." "She has a natural ear for it," my mom would say to anyone who would listen, her voice filled with a reverence usually reserved for religious phenomena. The fact that Jenna complained endlessly about practicing and quit a year later was never mentioned. The piano remained, a silent, expensive monument to a whim. That same year, I discovered a passion for science. I spent hours at the library, devouring books on astronomy and biology. For the school science fair, I worked for weeks on a project demonstrating the principles of hydroponics. I built a small functioning system out of plastic bottles and tubing, and successfully grew a small lettuce plant without soil. I was fascinated by the process, the careful measurements, the miracle of growth. I won second place in the entire school. The prize was a brand new beginner's microscope set. I remember my hands shaking as I accepted it on the school stage. I carried the box home as if it were made of glass. I burst through the front door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. "Mom, Dad, look what I won!" I placed the box on the kitchen table, my voice trembling with the need for their approval. My dad glanced up from his newspaper. "What's that?" "It's a microscope. I won second place in the science fair," he grunted, his eyes already returning to the sports page. "That's nice. Don't leave your junk on the table. "Dinner's almost ready." Junk. He called it junk. My mother came over and picked up the box, turning it over in her hands as if she wasn't sure what it was for. "Well, isn't that interesting?" she said, her voice holding the same flat tone she used when commenting on the weather. "Just make sure you keep it in your room, Ellie. I don't want little glass slides all over the house." There was no praise for the weeks of work, no curiosity about my project, no celebration of my achievement. My victory was an inconvenience, a piece of clutter to be managed. That night, while Jenna was being praised for finally mastering a simple C scale on the piano, I was in my room, setting up my microscope on the floor in my small corner. I felt a familiar cold weight settle in my chest. It was the understanding that my interests were worthless because they were mine. Their love and attention were finite resources, and the budget had already been allocated to my siblings. Mark's allocation was just as generous as Jenna's, though for different reasons. He was the athlete, the all-boy son my father had always wanted. The fact that he was, at best, a mediocre athlete was irrelevant. His life was a series of celebrated efforts. He'd spend an entire baseball season warming the bench, get put in for one inning, and drop a fly ball, and my dad would still boom from the stands, "That's the way to be out there, son." The car rides home would be filled with detailed breakdowns of the game, my dad offering coaching advice, my mom clucking about how handsome he looked in his uniform. His participation was the victory. My high school debate team experience was a stark contrast. I wasn't just a participant. I was good. I loved the intellectual combat, the thrill of dismantling an opponent's argument with logic and evidence. It was a skill, something I had to work for, honing my speeches late into the night. When our team fought our way to the state finals in my junior year, it felt like the culmination of everything I'd worked for. The competition was held in the state capitol, a 2-hour drive away. It was an all-day Saturday event. I presented the information at the dinner table a week before, my hands clutching the permission slip. "The state debate finals are next Saturday," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm the final speaker for our team. It would mean so much to me if you could come." My father didn't even look up from his plate. "Saturday? Can't. Mark's got a doubleheader. Preseason scrimmage." The word scrimmage felt like a physical blow. It was a practice game. It didn't count for anything. It was objectively, provably less important than a state final. I looked at my mom, a desperate appeal in my eyes. "Mom, it's really important to me." She reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt deeply condescending. "Oh, sweetie, you know how these things are. Your father and I are Mark's biggest fans. It's what we do. We can't miss his games. You're so smart and independent, you don't need us there holding your hand." Independent. They used my competence as an excuse for their neglect. Because I could handle things on my own, I was expected to. I didn't cry or argue. I had learned long ago that it was pointless. It would only lead to me being labeled dramatic or sensitive. I just nodded and quietly finished my dinner, the food tasteless in my mouth. I went to the state finals with my coach. I delivered the closing argument, my voice ringing with a conviction fueled by anger and hurt. And we won. I remember standing on that brightly lit stage, the heavy trophy in my hands, searching the dark auditorium for the faces I knew weren't there. The emptiness of their seats felt more real than the applause. The ride home was quiet. My coach tried to make conversation, but I could only give one-word answers, the victory feeling hollow and strangely lonely. When I walked into my house late that night, my parents were on the sofa, watching a movie. My trophy, the symbol of a state-level championship, was in my hands. My mom looked up. "Oh, you're home. How'd it go?" "We won," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey," she said, her eyes already drifting back to the television screen. "Mark hit a double today, a real line drive to left field. Your father thinks the new stance is finally paying off." And that was it. My state championship was acknowledged with the same level of enthusiasm as a comment about the weather, and then immediately overshadowed by my brother's minor, meaningless accomplishment in a practice game. I walked to my room and placed the trophy on my dresser. In the dim light, it looked less like a prize and more like a tombstone, marking the death of my hope that I could ever be enough to earn their attention. The silence in the house was their native language, a language of dismissal I had been forced to learn. I thought that maybe if I built something big enough, something they couldn't ignore or belittle, like a house, I could finally force them to learn a new language, the language of pride in their daughter. The dream of the house began as a quiet act of rebellion. It was a secret I kept, a flicker of defiance against the narrative my family had written for me, the sensible, responsible, and ultimately invisible daughter. This rebellion, however, wasn't loud or dramatic. It was fought in the silence of my tiny studio apartment, waged on the battlefield of an Excel spreadsheet, and paid for with the currency of my own youth. For 5 solid years, my life was a relentless cycle of work, exhaustion, and deprivation. My job as a pediatric nurse was my calling, but it was also my crucible. I worked in the neonatal intensive care unit, a world of humming machines, hushed whispers, and the impossibly fragile lives of premature infants. The work was emotionally draining, a constant tightrope walk between hope and despair. Most of my colleagues were fiercely protective of their time off, creating a necessary barrier between the intensity of the hospital and their own lives. I did the opposite. I tore that barrier down and lived inside the hospital's sterile, demanding walls. My name was at the top of every overtime list. I became the default yes for any call-out. A coworker has the flu? I'll take her shift. Someone's babysitter canceled. I can cover for him. Christmas, Thanksgiving, New Year's Eve. I worked them all. I saw more holidays under the fluorescent lights of the NICU than I did under a family roof. I remember one Thanksgiving. I was helping a new mother learn how to tube feed her tiny 1-pound son. She was crying softly, overwhelmed with fear and love. My phone buzzed with a picture from my family's Thanksgiving dinner. The table was laden with food, everyone was smiling, and Mark was carving the turkey. The text from my mom read, "Thinking of you. It's not the same without you here." But they had never once asked me not to pick up the shift. They just accepted my absence as a matter of course. Another facet of Ellie being Ellie. They enjoyed the idea of my noble sacrifice far more than they would have enjoyed my actual presence. This relentless work schedule was only half the battle. The other half was a brutal, self-imposed austerity. My apartment was in a rundown building on the edge of town, the kind with creaky floors and neighbors who argued at all hours. My living space consisted of a mattress in the corner, a folding chair, and a tower of milk crates that served as a dresser, bookshelf, and pantry. I owned 3 sets of scrubs, 1 pair of worn-out sneakers, and a single nice dress for the rare occasions I couldn't avoid. Like a hospital charity event, my diet was a monotonous rotation of the cheapest food I could find. A 10-pack of ramen was dinner for a week. A loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter was a luxury. I became an expert at identifying the days when the hospital cafeteria had a surplus of bagels they'd leave in the break room. I'd wrap them in paper towels and take them home. I lost weight. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes, and my social life evaporated completely. Friends eventually stopped inviting me out, tired of my endless, vague excuses. The truth felt too pathetic to admit. I can't go out for a 2-for-1 burger with you, because that $10 is a line item in my Dreamhouse spreadsheet, and I'm already behind this month. The most painful part of this sacrifice was that it was happening in parallel with my role as the family's unofficial, unacknowledged financial safety net. My frugality wasn't just for me, it was for them. Their financial crises always arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. The calls from my mother were the most insidious. They were masterpieces of passive-aggressive manipulation. She would never ask for money directly. Instead, she'd call for a chat, her voice brittle with manufactured stress. "Oh, Ellie," she'd sigh, "I just don't know. The furnace is making that strange rattling sound again. Your father keeps ignoring it, but you know how he is. The repairman said it could cost over $1,000 to fix, and with property taxes due, well, we'll figure something out. We always do." She would then fall silent, leaving a void I was conditioned to fill. I would picture them in the cold, my father too proud to admit he couldn't afford it, and the guilt would twist in my gut like a knife. I'd hang up, log into my banking app with trembling fingers, and transfer the money. The confirmation screen would feel like a defeat. Another month, another 2 months added to my own sentence. Her thank you when it came was always casual. "Oh, you didn't have to do that, sweetie." But it's a big help. Mark's requests were more direct and infuriating. He treated me less like a sister and more like an ATM that occasionally dispensed unwanted advice. He'd text, not call. "Yo, car payment is due. Can you spot me $300? I'll get you back next week." He never did. One time I made the mistake of questioning him. "Mark, this is the 3rd time in 6 months. What's going on with your job?" The backlash was immediate and vicious. A torrent of texts accused me of being judgmental, of thinking I was better than him just because I had a fancy hospital job. He painted me as a cold, unfeeling hoarder of money, and himself as the victim. The conversation ended with him texting, "Forget it. I'll ask mom and dad, even though I know they don't have it. I just figured you'd want to help your own brother." It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple. And it worked. An hour later, I sent him the money, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and shame. A few days later, his girlfriend posted photos of their weekend trip to a ski resort. My $300 had paid for his lift tickets. Jenna's approach was all drama and tears. She saw herself as a tragic artist, too sensitive for the harsh realities of finance. She called me one night sobbing hysterically. "Ellie, my landlord is a monster. He's threatening to evict me. All because I'm a few months behind on rent. How am I supposed to create when I'm worried about being homeless?" She spoke of her part-time barista job as a soul-crushing burden that stifled her true calling. I listened to her tirade, picturing my own tiny, bare apartment. I was working 60 hours a week so I could one day have a home, while she worked 15 hours a week and felt entitled to a trendy downtown loft she couldn't afford. "Jenna, maybe you should look for a cheaper place. Or pick up more hours," I suggested gently. "You don't get it," she shrieked. "You have no soul, Ellie. You only think about money." Some of us have bigger things to worry about, like our art. The conversation ended with me paying her landlord 2 months of back rent directly from my house fund. It was a devastating blow to my savings. It set me back by half a year, but the alternative in my mind was worse. It would be my fault if she were evicted. My family would never let me forget it. I would be the cold-hearted sister who let the artist down. So I paid. I always paid. I paid their bills, funded their lifestyles, and bailed them out of their mistakes. They took, and never once did they seem to consider what it was costing me. They never saw the skipped meals, the canceled plans, the crushing weight of my exhaustion. They saw a steady, reliable resource, as dependable and unthinking as a water faucet. They had no idea that faucet was connected to a well I was digging with my bare hands, and it was getting dangerously close to running dry. All I wanted was for them to see the house and finally understand the depth of the well. The day of the housewarming was the culmination of 5 years of relentless, silent toil. I woke up that morning feeling a nervous, electric hum under my skin. This was it. This was the day they would finally see. The day my sacrifice would be given meaning. I spent the entire day in a state of joyful, frantic preparation. I wasn't just throwing a party. I was curating an experience. I was setting a stage for the validation I was so desperate to receive. Every choice I made was a carefully considered message to them. I drove to 3 different grocery stores to find the exact brand of sharp cheddar cheese my dad liked for his buffalo chicken dip. I spent an hour in the morning baking the lemon pie, my kitchen filling with the sweet, bright scent that I always associated with my mother, even though she'd never baked one for me. I remembered watching her once, baking that same pie for a church bake sale, her movements confident and sure. I had asked her to teach me and she'd waved me away. "Oh, you just make a mess, Ellie. Go read a book or something." I'd learned how to make it from a YouTube video, pausing and rewinding a dozen times to get the meringue just right. As I slid the finished pie onto a cooling rack, golden and perfect, I felt a ridiculous surge of pride. See? I can do it too. I can be the daughter you celebrate. I bought 2 bottles of the slightly overpriced Pinot Grigio that Jenna considered the only acceptable wine and filled a cooler with the obscure craft IPA that Mark was currently obsessed with. I arranged the food on platters I'd bought specifically for the occasion, garnishing everything with fresh parsley. I wanted it all to look effortless, a feast that had simply appeared, masking the days of planning and the significant dent in my carefully managed budget. I wanted them to be impressed, not just by the house, but by me, by my competence, by my thoughtfulness. As the clock ticked toward 7 p.m., my anticipation reached a fever pitch. I did a final walkthrough of the house. The balloons spelling home bobbed cheerfully on the staircase. The lights were dimmed to a warm, inviting glow. The playlist of soft indie rock I'd painstakingly created was playing at the perfect volume. Everything was ready. I was ready. The first hour passed in a blur of nervous energy. I kept smoothing the wrinkles out of my dress, checking my phone for a text, and peeking through the blinds at the empty street. Every passing set of headlights sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. "Is that them?" But each car continued on, disappearing into the darkness. By 8 p.m., the nervous energy had begun to curdle into a familiar, sour dread. The house felt too big, too quiet. The cheerful music began to sound hollow, mocking. I sent the text to the group chat then, the one with the smiling emoji, a desperate attempt to pretend I was feeling casual and fun, not like a child waiting to be picked up from school long after all the other kids have gone home. Silence. Not a single reply. I started pacing, walking a frantic loop from the living room to the kitchen and back again. The excuses I had always been so good at making for them started to sound thin and pathetic even to my own ears. A massive, unreported traffic jam that only affected my entire family? All of their phones dying at the exact same time? It was absurd. The truth was a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. They had forgotten. Or worse, they hadn't forgotten. They just hadn't cared enough to come. At 8:45, I couldn't stand the sight of the untouched feast anymore. I started pulling cling wrap over the platters of food, my movements jerky and angry. The cheese was starting to sweat. The dip was forming a skin. The beautiful meal I had constructed as a tribute to them was slowly spoiling, a perfect metaphor for my hope. I sank onto the sofa, the silence of the house pressing in on me from all sides. It felt heavier than just an absence of sound. It was an active presence, a thick, suffocating blanket of their indifference. I thought about all the times I had dropped everything for them. The time I left work in the middle of a shift because Jenna called, having a panic attack over a fight with her boyfriend. The time I drove 2 hours in a snowstorm to help my dad fix a burst pipe because he refused to call a plumber. The countless times I had rearranged my life, my budget, my needs, to accommodate theirs. I had always shown up. At 9:47, the buzz of my phone on the sofa cushion felt like a small explosion in the quiet room. My heart gave a painful, stupid lurch. It was a message, in the group chat, from Jenna. I fumbled for the phone, my hands shaking. Maybe it was an apology, a crazy story about a fender bender or a family emergency. Something, anything, to explain away the gaping hole of their absence. I read the 5 words. Busy tonight. Maybe next time. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. It was as if I'd been punched in the stomach. The words were so casual, so breezy, so utterly devoid of apology or awareness. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. And this was the final, deepest slice. Busy. The word was an insult. It was a lie. They weren't busy. I just wasn't the priority. My life's greatest achievement was less important than whatever else they had decided to do on a Saturday night. Watching TV, going to a movie, anything. Maybe next time. The lie they used to keep me hoping, to ensure I'd still be there the next time they needed something. It was a tranquilizer dart, meant to soothe the immediate hurt and prevent any real confrontation. But it didn't work. Not anymore. A wave of something I had never felt before washed over me. It wasn't just sadness or disappointment. It was a cold, clear, crystalline rage. It was the anger of a lifetime of being dismissed, of being used, of being made to feel small. I stood up, my body feeling strangely light. I walked into the kitchen, my movements calm and deliberate. I opened the trash can. I picked up the beautiful lemon meringue pie, the one I had poured so much pathetic hope into, and I didn't just drop it in. I slammed it down. The ceramic pie plate shattered, a sharp, satisfying crack that was the first real sound in the house for hours. Meringue and lemon curd splattered against the inside of the bin. It was a mess, a ruined, ugly mess. And it was the most honest thing that had happened all night. The shattered pie plate in the bottom of my trash can felt like a final punctuation mark on a story I had been telling myself for 29 years. The story was a fantasy, a carefully constructed narrative in which I was the unsung hero, the quiet pillar of the family, and one day, my unwavering loyalty and love would finally be recognized. That night, standing in the deafening silence of my beautiful empty home, I was forced to admit that the story was a lie. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the result of a pattern, a deeply ingrained history of their absence that I had chosen, over and over again, to ignore. My mind, unbidden, replayed a slideshow of my life's most significant moments, each one tainted by the same brand of casual neglect. The first and most vivid image was my college graduation. I could feel the humid May air on my skin, the slightly too large cap slipping on my head. I had earned a degree in nursing, graduating with honors. I'd worked my way through school, juggling classes and clinicals with a part-time waitressing job, determined to be a financial burden to no one. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I scanned the vast crowd in the amphitheater, my eyes searching for them. I found them, my dad checking his watch, my mom whispering something to him, a look of boredom on her face. They looked like people waiting for a bus, not parents witnessing a milestone. After the ceremony, amidst the joyful chaos of cheering families and popping champagne corks, I found them near the exit. My mom gave me a brief, airy hug. "We're so proud of you, sweetie. You looked so serious up there." Before I could even respond, my dad clapped his hands together. "All right, we've got to hit the road. Mark's team made the playoffs, and the game is clear across the state. If we leave now, we can just make it for the first pitch." I stood there, clutching my diploma in its cardboard folder, and watched them turn and walk away. They were buzzing with an energy and excitement that had been completely absent during my ceremony. Mark's baseball game, another of his many athletic endeavors that would ultimately lead nowhere, was the real event of the day. My 4 years of hard work was just the opening act they had to sit through. They didn't offer to take me to dinner. They didn't buy me a celebratory gift. They didn't even take a single photograph. I have no pictures with my family from my college graduation. Later that night, alone in my now empty dorm room, surrounded by packing boxes, I got a text from my dad. It was a blurry photo of a scoreboard. Mark's team had won. "What a game!" the text read. I deleted it without replying. The memory shifted, and I was younger, standing in the sterile, beige hallway of a hospital. I was 23, and I had just been rushed into emergency surgery for appendicitis. The pain had been blinding, and the fear had been a cold knot in my stomach. From the gurney in the ER, just before they gave me the anesthesia, I had called my mom. Her voice was distracted, distant. "Oh my goodness, Ellie, that sounds awful. Listen, I'm in the middle of something right now. Jenna just broke up with her boyfriend, again, and she's a complete wreck. I really need to be here for her. You're in good hands there, the doctors are wonderful. Call me when you're out of surgery." She didn't come. No one did. I woke up alone in the recovery room, a raw, searing pain in my side, and a deeper, colder ache in my heart. For the next 2 days, I lay in that hospital bed, watching the families of other patients come and go with flowers and magazines and comforting words. The nurses would come in and ask with cheerful professionalism, "Any visitors today?" And I would have to shake my head, the shame burning in my cheeks. On the day I was discharged, a nurse asked if my ride was on the way. I had to admit that I didn't have one. I called my mom. "Oh, you're getting out today? That's great news, honey," she'd said. "We can't come get you, though. Mark borrowed the car to go see some concert with his friends. You'll have to get a cab." I remember every detail of that taxi ride home. The way every bump in the road sent a jolt of agony through my abdomen. The way the cab driver kept looking at me in the rearview mirror with pity in his eyes. I had to pay him with a credit card because I didn't have enough cash. And I remember feeling humiliated. I struggled up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, pausing on each landing to catch my breath, my body shaking with pain and weakness. When I finally got inside and shut the door, I slid to the floor and sobbed, not from the physical pain, but from the crushing weight of the realization that my own well-being was, at best, an inconvenience to them. This history of absence wasn't just confined to major events. It was woven into the very fabric of my daily life. When I got my first nursing job, the one I had worked so hard for, I called them, my voice brimming with pride. My father's response was a grunt. "Well, don't expect it to be easy. That's a tough job. You'll probably burn out in a year." My mother's was a backhanded compliment. "That's nice, dear. At least you'll have a steady paycheck. You won't have to worry about money so much." They didn't see my success. They saw a problem averted. My stability meant they wouldn't have to worry about me, freeing up more of their emotional and financial resources for Jenna and Mark. There were countless smaller cuts. The birthdays they forgot until a late-night phone call. The time I was nominated for a Nursing Excellence Award at my hospital. And when I told them, Jenna immediately changed the subject to complain about her art professor. The relationships that withered because they treated my boyfriends with a polite, icy indifference, making it clear that no one I chose would ever be truly welcome. I had spent my entire life making excuses for them. They're just busy. They don't mean it. That's just how they are. But standing in my new house, the one I had bought with no help from them, the one they couldn't even be bothered to visit, the excuses finally crumbled, revealing the ugly truth underneath. It wasn't unintentional. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was a choice. They actively chose again and again not to see me, not to celebrate me, and not to show up for me. They had been absent for every important moment of my life, and this silent housewarming wasn't the exception. It was the rule. After the sharp, satisfying crack of the shattering pie plate, a new kind of silence descended upon the house. It was different from the heavy, expectant silence of the hours before. This silence was clean, sharp, and cold. It was the silence of a fever having broken. The rage that had propelled me to the trash can had been a wildfire, burning through the dead brush of my own denial. And this quiet was the aftermath, a landscape of stark, desolate clarity. There was no more hope to wound, no more expectation to crush. There was only the truth, ugly and liberating. I took a deep, shuddering breath and began to clean. It felt like the only logical thing to do. My movements were methodical, almost robotic. I pulled the cling wrap off the platters of food, the mini sandwiches, the cooling buffalo chicken dip, the sweating cheese, and scraped everything into the trash can on top of the ruined pie. I didn't salvage a single bite. This food had been an offering to ghosts, and I wanted it out of my house. I dumped the melted ice and lukewarm water from the drink bucket into the sink. I poured the 2 bottles of Jenna's favorite wine down the drain, the glugging sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. Each action felt like a severing, a small decisive cut of a tie that had been strangling me for years. I washed every dish, dried every plate, and put everything away in its new cupboard. I wiped down the counters until they gleamed. I gathered the cheerful mocking party napkins and threw them in the trash. I was erasing the evening, wiping away the evidence of my own foolish, stubborn hope. As I worked, my mind was blessedly, wonderfully empty. The usual frantic inner monologue, the pleading, the excusing, the desperate analysis of their behavior, was gone. In its place was a vast, cold calm. I was a machine performing a function. Erase, clean, reset. It was just after midnight when the doorbell rang. The sound was so alien, so unexpected, that it felt like a physical blow. It sliced through the sterile silence of the house, loud and jarring. For a half-second, a phantom limb of my old self twitched, a flicker of hope, a question of who, but it died just as quickly. My heart didn't leap. It sank, a slow, heavy drop into the pit of my stomach. I knew with a weary certainty who it would be. They would have sent an envoy, a scout to assess the damage and manage the fallout. I walked to the door, my socked feet silent on the hardwood floors. I looked through the peephole, and the distorted fisheye view confirmed my suspicion. It was Jenna, my sister, standing on my porch, bathed in the pale yellow glow of the outdoor light. She was holding a flimsy, slightly crushed cardboard box from the grocery store bakery. I opened the door. I didn't say hello. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there, my hand on the doorknob, creating a barrier with my body. She looked flustered, her hair slightly messy, her eyes avoiding mine. "Hey," she said, her voice attempting a casualness that fell completely flat. She tried to peer around me into the house. "Just thought I'd stop by. It's midnight, Jenna." My voice was devoid of emotion. It was a statement of fact. "Yeah, I know. I was in the area." A pathetic lie. She lived 45 minutes away in the opposite direction. She shoved the cake box toward me. "Here, I brought this. It's chocolate." "I know you like chocolate." I looked at the generic, mass-produced cake, then thought of the lemon meringue pie, my mother's supposed favorite, now lying shattered in my trash can. The gesture was so transparent, so insultingly inadequate, that a humorless smile touched my lips. It was a Band-Aid for a bullet wound. "I'm not hungry," I said. Jenna's composure finally started to crack. A flash of irritation crossed her face. She pushed past me, stepping into the entryway without an invitation. "Geez, Ellie, can you at least pretend to be gracious?" I drove all the way out here. She stopped in the middle of the living room and looked around. Her eyes scanned the spotless counters, the empty rooms, the distinct lack of any party atmosphere. "Wow," she said, a nervous little laugh escaping her lips. "Looks like it was a real rager." The sarcasm in her voice was the flint that struck a spark in my cold calm. "There was no party," I said, closing the front door with a quiet click. "No one came?" "Yeah, I know," she said, finally turning to face me. She wouldn't meet my gaze, choosing instead to examine one of the balloons tied to the staircase. "Listen, about that. Dad was really tired from his golf game today, and Mom got one of her headaches. You know how she gets. And Mark had to help a buddy move a couch or something. It was just one of those nights." Everyone was wiped, a torrent of flimsy, predictable excuses. Not a single one of them sounded real. They were just words strung together to build a wall against her own culpability. "You were busy too, I assume," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Yeah," she said quickly, a little too quickly. "I had to finish a painting. The inspiration just hit, and I had to get it on the canvas. You know how it is." I looked at her, truly looked at her. My sister, the artist, the masterpiece. Her life was a collection of self-serving narratives where her whims were epic struggles and her needs were non-negotiable. I saw in that moment that she wasn't just lying to me. She was lying to herself. She had to believe her painting was more important, because the alternative, that she had knowingly and casually inflicted a deep wound on her sister, was a truth too ugly for her to face. She walked over to my new sofa and ran her hand over the fabric. "This is nice." "The house is nice, Ellie. It's really big." There was an edge to her voice, something that wasn't quite admiration. It was envy. "You did well for yourself." "I worked for it," I said. "I know." She sighed, a theatrical, world-weary sound. She finally sat down uninvited on my sofa. She patted the cushion next to her, a silent command for me to join her, to make this easier for her. I remained standing. "Listen, Ellie," she began, launching into what was clearly the pre-rehearsed speech. Mom felt bad that no one could make it. She's the one who told me to bring the cake. We just want you to know we're happy for you. We are. But you can't take things so personally. There it was, the core of their defense. The problem wasn't their behavior. It was my reaction to it. You get so worked up over things, she continued, gaining confidence. You've always been so sensitive. It was just a housewarming party. There will be other parties. Don't take it so personal, Ellie. It's not that deep. Her words hung in the air between us, a profound and stunning misreading of everything I was, everything I had ever been. Not that deep. She was looking at the very tip of an iceberg, the accumulated pain of a lifetime, and calling it a snowflake. The cold calm inside me finally gave way to something else. It wasn't rage. It was a chilling, surgical precision. I walked slowly from the entryway into the kitchen. Jenna's eyes followed me. I opened the lid of the trash can. The stench of garbage and ruined food wafted out. I pointed. "What is that?" she asked, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "That," I said, my voice as level and sharp as a blade, "is a lemon meringue pie. The one Mom always said was her favorite. I spent the morning making it for her from scratch. It's in there next to your dad's dip and Mark's beer and the wine I bought for you. That is how deep it is, Jenna." I let the lid slam shut. I turned back to face her, and for the first time she looked truly uncomfortable, cornered. "This isn't about a party," I continued, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent house. "This is about my college graduation, when you all left to go to Mark's baseball game. It's about the 2 days I spent alone in the hospital after surgery, because you had a boyfriend crisis. It's about every award I ever won that was ignored, every birthday you forgot, every time I desperately needed you and you were all busy." Tears started to well in my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were hot tears of fury, of a truth finally being spoken aloud. "You stand there in my house, the house I worked 60-hour weeks for, the house I paid for while I was also paying your rent and Mark's car insurance and Mom and Dad's bills, and you dare to tell me it's not that deep?" I took a step closer, my whole body trembling. "No, Jenna, you're wrong. It's deeper than you could ever possibly admit, because admitting it would mean you'd have to look at the part you play. You get to be the celebrated artist, and Mark gets to be the golden boy, because I was the one holding everything up. I was the foundation you all built your lives on. And you can't celebrate my success because this house proves that I don't need you. But the terrifying truth, the really deep truth, is that you all still need me." Silence. Jenna's face was pale, her mouth slightly agape. She looked like I had slapped her. The self-serving narrative had been shattered, and she was utterly lost without it. She stood up, her movements stiff. "You're being crazy," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're hysterical." "No," I said, my voice dropping back to that chilling calm. "I'm finally being honest, and I think you should leave now." She didn't argue. She scurried to the door like a frightened mouse. She fumbled with the knob for a second, then pulled it open and practically ran out onto the porch. She didn't look back. She had left the cheap grocery store cake on my pristine kitchen counter. I picked up the box, walked to the front door, opened it and placed it on the doormat outside. Then I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The visit wasn't an apology. It was a confirmation. They would never understand. And for the first time, I understood that I didn't need them to. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the sofa in the dark, watching the blackness outside my windows slowly soften into the bruised purple of pre-dawn. The confrontation with Jenna had drained the last of my adrenaline, leaving behind a profound and unnerving stillness. The house was quiet again, but the silence had transformed once more. It was no longer the silence of neglect or the silence of rage. It was the silence of sovereignty. It was the sound of a space that was entirely, unequivocally mine. As the first rays of sun streamed through the living room window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a sense of resolve settled over me. It was as clear and solid as a block of ice in my chest. The pain of the last 29 years was not something that could be fixed with a conversation or a half-hearted apology cake. It was a systemic rot, a foundational flaw in the architecture of my family. You can't fix a cracked foundation. You can only build a new structure on solid ground. And that solid ground had to be here, inside the walls of this house, inside the borders of my own life. I made a pot of coffee, the bitter, dark aroma filling the kitchen. As I sipped it, I took out my phone. My thumb hovered over the family group chat icon, the one that had been the source of so much anxiety and disappointment. For years, I had watched that chat, waiting for a scrap of validation, a mention of my name that wasn't attached to a request for money. I opened it and read the last message. "Jenna's breezy, busy tonight. Maybe next time." My finger moved to the top of the screen. I tapped the button that said, Leave conversation. A small notification popped up. You have left the group. It was anticlimactic and monumentally significant all at once. One down. Next, I went to my contacts. Mom, Dad, Mark, Jenna. One by one, I opened their contact information and hit block. The action was swift, digital, and ruthless. There would be no more manipulative phone calls, no more demanding texts. I was cutting off their access to me, cauterizing the wound. I then opened my social media apps and did the same, methodically unfollowing and blocking each of them. And then, for good measure, my aunts and cousins who I knew would only act as their spies. Each click was a brick being laid in a new wall, a wall they would not be permitted to cross. This digital purge felt good, but it also felt insufficient. It was invisible. I needed a physical manifestation of this new reality, a clear and undeniable statement that things had changed forever. I went out to the garage, where the empty moving boxes were still stacked against a wall. I found a large, sturdy cardboard box that had once held a microwave. Using a utility knife, I cut out a clean, rectangular piece. I found a thick, black permanent marker. I knelt on the cold concrete floor of the garage, the cardboard spread out before me like a fresh canvas. I thought for a long time about what to write. I didn't want it to be emotional or explanatory. I didn't want it to invite a conversation. It needed to be a declaration. A new law. I wrote the words in big, clear block letters. The marker squeaked against the cardboard. A resolute sound in the quiet garage. First line, no family discounts. This was for the years of financial support. The unspoken assumption that my money was their money. That chapter was closed. I was not their bank, not their safety net, not their ATM. Second line, no family visits. This was for the empty housewarming, for the graduation, for the hospital stay. My home was not a public space they could choose to grace with their presence whenever it was convenient. It was a private sanctuary, and their visiting privileges had been permanently and irrevocably revoked. Third line, no exceptions. This was the most important part. It was the lock on the door. It was for the future me, the me who might feel a pang of guilt on a holiday, the me who might be tempted to soften when faced with a manufactured crisis or a tearful, manipulative plea. This was a promise to myself that I would not break. I took a roll of heavy-duty packing tape and marched out the front door. My house was on a quiet suburban street with a small, neat front yard and a white picket fence with a gate at the entrance to the walkway. It was the fence I had fallen in love with, the quintessential symbol of a perfect, happy home. Now, it would become my border wall. My hands were steady as I taped the crude, handwritten sign to the front of the gate, facing the street. It was ugly. It was stark. It clashed horribly with the charming aesthetic of my new home, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever created. It was a monument to my own liberation. I took a step back onto the sidewalk and looked at it. The bold black letters on the brown cardboard were an unmissable statement. This property is under new management. I took out my phone again. I hesitated for only a moment. Part of me, the old, conditioned part, screamed that this was a terrible, shameful thing to do, that I was airing my dirty laundry for the world to see. Then I thought of Jenna, accusing me of being dramatic. Fine, I thought. I'll give you dramatic. But this wasn't drama for drama's sake. This was survival. I took a clear photo. The sign was in the foreground, the gate and the beautiful, welcoming facade of my house visible behind it. The contrast was perfect. I opened my social media. I didn't post it to my private personal page. I posted it publicly. My hands didn't even shake as I typed the caption. I kept it simple, factual, and devoid of self-pity. Last night, I planned to host a housewarming party for my family in the home I worked and sacrificed for 5 years to buy. They all agreed to come. No one showed up. Not a single person. Today, I am setting a new house rule. My home is a place of peace, respect, and safety. The front gate is now a boundary. My peace is no longer negotiable. I hit the post button. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then, a few of my friends liked it, followed by a few hesitant comments of support. Thinking of you, Ellie. Good for you. And then something shifted. Someone must have shared it. The notifications started to trickle in, then it became a stream, and then it became a flood. Likes, shares, and comments from people I had never met. Strangers. Hundreds of them. The comments were what broke me. I sat on my new sofa, the sun now warm on my face, and I read them through a blur of tears. These weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of a profound and overwhelming sense of not being alone. A woman from Ohio wrote, I went no contact with my toxic parents 3 years ago. It was the hardest and best decision of my life. Your real life starts now. "So proud of you, stranger," a man from California. "That sign is a masterpiece. Boundaries don't make you a bad person. They make you a person who respects yourself. Welcome to the first day of your real life." Story after story poured in. People who had been overlooked for a golden child sibling. People who had been used as a family ATM. People whose greatest achievements had been met with silence. They shared their own pain, their own struggles, and their own moments of finally saying no more. They were validating my entire life experience, an experience my own family had spent decades telling me I was imagining, that I was too sensitive, that it wasn't that deep. The balloons on the staircase that spelled home suddenly seemed flimsy and childish. The cardboard sign on the gate was the real statement. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor who was finally telling her story. And for the first time, people were listening. The likes climbed into the thousands. The empty, silent house from the night before was suddenly filled with the voices of 1,000 strangers, all of them telling me the same thing. "We see you. We hear you. You are not wrong." The wave of online support was a healing balm, a validation I had craved for my entire life, but I knew it wouldn't last. A public declaration of independence is, to a toxic family system, a declaration of war. I spent the next day in a state of anxious calm, waiting for the inevitable counterattack. It came on Monday morning. It started with a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered, putting the phone on speaker. "Eleanor Catherine, you had better have a good explanation for this." It was my mother's voice, but it was a version I had rarely heard before. The usual tone of manipulative softness was gone, replaced by a shrill, steely fury. "An explanation for what?" I asked, my own voice calm. I was surprised at how steady I sounded. The validation from hundreds of strangers had forged a new spine within me. "Don't you play dumb with me," she shrieked, her voice cracking. This thing you posted online. The sign. Our friends are calling us." "People from church. Do you have any idea the humiliation you've caused? You are airing our private family business for the entire world to see." Our private business, I thought. My pain was their business. My neglect was their business. It was only a problem now because it was no longer private. "The only thing I made public was the truth," I said simply. "You were all invited. You all said you would come, and none of you did. Those are the facts." "We were busy," she screamed. "Things happen. You are the most selfish, ungrateful child I have ever known. After everything we've done for you." The sheer breathtaking audacity of that statement, "after everything we've done for you," almost made me laugh. I thought of the thousands of dollars I had given them, the shifts I had covered, the sacrifices I had made. But I didn't argue. I had learned from my confrontation with Jenna that arguing was pointless. They didn't operate in the realm of facts or logic. They operated in the realm of their own narrative, where they were the perpetual victims of my unreasonable expectations. "I'm not going to argue with you," I said, my voice still even. "The post is staying up. The sign is staying up. This conversation is over." "You listen to me," she started, but I heard a fumbling on the other end. And then my father's voice, a low, menacing growl, came on the line. "You take that damn post down right now," he boomed. "You're acting like a spoiled brat. You think you're so high and mighty in your fancy new house? Let me tell you something. You keep this up and we'll start telling people the truth." "The truth?" I asked, genuinely curious as to what version of reality he had constructed. "That you're renting the place and pretending you bought it," he spat. "That you're drowning in debt and this is all just some pathetic cry for attention. We'll tell everyone you faked the whole thing. How do you think that will look?" There it was, the core of their strategy. If you can't control the narrative, destroy the narrator's credibility. For a moment, a sliver of the old fear pierced through my newfound resolve. The fear of not being believed. The fear of being seen as a liar, as unstable. "You can say whatever you want," I said, my voice trembling slightly for the first time. "It won't change the truth." I ended the call. My hands were shaking. I had known they would be angry, but I hadn't anticipated the sheer viciousness, the immediate leap to threats and lies. It wasn't the reaction of people who were hurt. It was the reaction of people who had been exposed. The next phase of their attack began online. Within hours, comments started appearing on my public post. They were from my cousins, my aunts, people who had never shown any interest in my life, but were now suddenly deputized as character witnesses for the prosecution. "She's always been dramatic. Ever since she was a little girl," my cousin Sarah wrote. "She twists things to make herself look like the victim." My Aunt Carol chimed in. "I heard she's in way over her head with that mortgage. This is just a stunt to get sympathy and maybe some GoFundMe money. So tacky." The comments were a coordinated smear campaign designed to discredit me, to paint me as unstable, attention-seeking, and dishonest. Every insecurity they had ever instilled in me was now being weaponized and broadcast to the world. For a few hours it worked. I curled up on my sofa, my phone clutched in my hand, and felt the familiar crushing weight of their collective disapproval. I felt the shame they wanted me to feel. Maybe they're right, a small, terrified voice whispered in my head. Maybe I am just being dramatic. But then I looked around my living room. I saw the solid walls, the gleaming floors. I thought of the years of work, the bone-deep exhaustion, the relentless saving. This was real. My sacrifice was real. Their neglect was real. And their lies were not going to erase my truth. The anger returned, cold and clear. They had threatened to lie about my home. They wanted to take my greatest achievement and turn it into a symbol of my dishonesty. I would not let them. I went to the heavy-duty file box where I kept my important documents. My hands were steady now. I pulled out the thick folder from the closing. I spread the documents out on my new dining room table. The deed, with my name printed in clear, bold type. The final closing statement, with the purchase price and all the figures meticulously laid out. A redacted copy of the first page of my mortgage agreement, showing the loan was in my name, and my name alone. I took out my phone and began taking pictures. Clear, well-lit, undeniable photographs of the evidence. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt powerful. They had escalated this war, and they had underestimated their opponent. They had forgotten that I was the one who was organized, meticulous, and detail-oriented. I was the one who kept all the receipts. I created a new post, a direct response to the rumors and lies. I uploaded the photos of the documents, each one a silent, irrefutable witness to the truth, and I wrote a caption that was as sharp and clean as a surgeon's scalpel. There seems to be some confusion, so I want to clear it up. Some of my family members are publicly claiming that I am lying about owning my home and that I am in financial trouble. For anyone who believes gossip over evidence, please see the attached photos of my closing documents and deed. The truth speaks for itself. The smear campaign ends now. I hit post. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. It was like dropping a lit match into a room full of gasoline. The post was shared hundreds, then thousands of times. My cousins and aunts deleted their malicious comments, their lies exposed for all to see. The online community that had supported me before now rallied around me with a righteous fury. The audacity to lie after what they did. One comment read, "She brought the receipts." Another screamed in all caps, "This is a masterclass in shutting down toxic people," wrote a third. The narrative was no longer in my family's control. They had tried to paint me as a liar, and in doing so had proven that they were the liars. They had tried to destroy my credibility, and had only succeeded in destroying their own. That evening, I sat in my quiet, peaceful house, my phone buzzing with notifications of support. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in my entire life. They had thrown their worst at me, their anger, their threats, their lies, and I was still standing. The foundation of my new life was not just holding, it was stronger than ever. In the days following my post with the legal documents, an uneasy silence fell over my family's side of the internet. The smear campaign had been so thoroughly and publicly dismantled that they had no ground left to stand on. They retreated, and for a few blissful days I allowed myself to believe that the war was over. I had drawn my boundary, defended it, and won. But the truth was, I had only won a single battle. The final, devastating blow was yet to come, and it would arrive not from the people I expected, but from the quietest corner of my family. The message came late one night. It was a private message on social media from a second cousin named Chloe. I barely knew her. She was a few years younger than me, and I had only ever seen her at the occasional awkward holiday gathering. She was always quiet, the type of person who observed from the corners of the room. I had always felt a silent kinship with her, another satellite orbiting the family stars. Her message was short and hesitant. "Ellie, I don't know if I should be doing this, but I can't stand what they're doing to you. It's not right. You don't deserve it. There's something you need to see." Before I could even reply, a series of images appeared in our chat. They were screenshots of a family group chat that I had never been a part of. This one wasn't just my parents and siblings. It included my aunts and uncles and a few of the more prominent cousins. The date stamps were from the week leading up to my housewarming party. My hands started to tremble as I zoomed in on the first image, my heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. The first message was from my father, sent the day I had invited them all to the party. It read, "Just a heads up, Ellie is having a housewarming party on Saturday. I think we should all agree that no one goes. The last thing she needs is a bigger ego." My mother had replied almost immediately, "I agree. She's in way over her head with that mortgage, Tom. You know she can't afford it on her own. If we all act unimpressed, she'll realize she's made a mistake sooner. It's for her own good, really." It wasn't an accident. It wasn't that they were busy. It was a planned, coordinated boycott. They had conspired to abandon me. The pain of that realization was sharp and sickening, but I kept reading, my eyes scanning the screen with a horrified fascination. My brother, Mark, had chimed in, "LOL, she'll be begging for a bailout in 6 months. When she has to sell, we should make her a lowball offer. She'll be desperate. We could probably get the place for half of what she paid." And then, the message that finally shattered the last remaining piece of my heart into dust. It was from Jenna, my sister. It would be perfect for me. The big front room would make an amazing art studio. We'd just be keeping it in the family, so it's really a win-win. She can move back into her little apartment and we can have the house. I dropped my phone on the sofa as if it had burned my hand. A wave of nausea washed over me. I ran to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, my body convulsing with the violent expulsion of a truth too toxic to contain. This was never about neglect. It was never about thoughtlessness or favoritism or being overlooked. It was a cold, calculated, and malicious plot. They had not been passively absent from my life. They had been actively, secretly, working against it. They hadn't just ignored my success. They had been banking on my failure. They had looked at my dream, the beautiful home I had bled for, and saw it as nothing more than a future asset they could acquire at a discount after my inevitable ruin. The kindness I had shown them, the money I had given them, the sacrifices I had made, all of it was recontextualized in this horrifying new light. They had taken my support not as a gift, but as a weakness to be exploited. They kept me drained and struggling so that I would never get powerful enough to escape their orbit. But I had broken free, and now they were trying to pull me back into the abyss. They wanted to see me broken, homeless, and crawling back to them for help, forced to sell them my dream for pennies on the dollar. The grief I felt was profound, a physical ache that spread from my chest through my entire body. I was mourning the loss of a family that I now realized had never existed in the first place. The people I had spent my life trying to please were strangers. Worse than strangers, they were my enemies. I sat on the cold tile of the bathroom floor for what felt like hours. The screenshots seared into my brain. The old Ellie would have hidden this pain, swallowed this betrayal, and suffered in silence. The old Ellie would have protected them, even now, from the consequences of their own cruelty. But the old Ellie had died in this house 2 nights ago. With a resolve that felt like it was forged in the center of the earth, I picked up my phone. I went back to the chat with my cousin. "Thank you, Chloe," I typed. "Thank you for telling me the truth. They're going to hate me for this," she replied instantly. "Then you'll have something in common with me," I wrote back. "And you'll be on the right side of history." I saved the screenshots to my phone. I didn't hesitate for a single second. This was not about revenge. This was not about airing dirty laundry. This was about survival. It was about exposing the rot so that it could no longer fester in the dark. It was about burning the entire diseased structure to the ground so that something new and healthy could one day grow in its place. I created one last post. I uploaded every single screenshot, in chronological order for the world to see. My caption was the shortest and the most devastating of them all. For anyone who still thinks this was just about a party, it was never about the party. It was about them actively waiting for me to fail so they could take my home. This is why I set boundaries. Imagine rooting against your own blood. I don't have to imagine it anymore. I hit post, and then, for the first time in my life, I turned my phone off. I didn't need to see the explosion. I didn't need to read the comments or witness the fallout. I knew what would happen. Their words, their own cruel and calculating words, would be their undoing. There was nothing left for me to say. Their own text messages would speak for me, and they would speak forever. The act of turning off my phone was a profound liberation. It was a conscious choice to step away from the noise, the drama, the impending nuclear fallout of my final post. For 29 years, my life had been dictated by the buzzing and pinging of that device. A summons from my mother, a demand from my brother, a crisis with my sister. By pressing that single button, I was choosing silence on my own terms. Not the painful, lonely silence of their neglect, but a chosen, peaceful silence of sanctuary. In the weeks that followed, I lived as if I were in a cocoon. I didn't turn my phone back on. I unplugged my router. I existed entirely within the 4 walls of my home, and for the first time it began to feel truly like one. The house was no longer a stage for a family drama or a monument to my sacrifice. It was simply my space, and I began the slow, quiet work of reclaiming it. I unpacked the last of the moving boxes, the ones I had labeled memories. Inside were the remnants of my childhood, a few faded photographs, the second-place medal from the science fair, a collection of sketchbooks filled with my messy drawings. I didn't feel the familiar pang of sadness looking at them. Instead, I felt a detached sense of archaeology, as if I were examining the artifacts of a life that belonged to someone else. I took the single-framed photo I had of my family, and taken at a department store studio when I was 10, and I buried it at the bottom of the box. I sealed the box with tape and carried it to the garage. The support I had seen online began to manifest in the real world, tangible proof that kindness existed outside of the twisted ecosystem I had escaped. One morning, I opened my front door to find a pot of vibrant yellow chrysanthemums on my porch. Tucked into the soil was a small handwritten card. "Welcome to the neighborhood. We're glad you're here." From the Millers at number 42. I had never even met the Millers. Tears welled in my eyes as I carried the heavy pot inside and placed it in the sunniest window in my living room. It was the first truly unconditional gift I had ever received. A few days later, an elderly woman from across the street knocked on my door. She held out a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil. "I'm Mary," she said with a kind, crinkled smile. "I saw your sign. It took me until I was 60 to learn how to do what you're doing now. I just wanted to bring you dinner." We stood on the porch and talked for 20 minutes. She didn't ask for details about my family. She just offered her presence, her warmth, and her lasagna. Letters began to arrive, forwarded from a P.O. box a supporter had set up for me after my address was leaked online. They came from all over the country, women and men sharing their own stories of escaping toxic families, of finding peace in the aftermath of a painful separation. They sent me small gifts, a handmade bookmark, a packet of wildflower seeds, a book of poetry. They were letters from a tribe I never knew I had. I bought a beautiful wooden box and kept them all inside, a collection of testimonials to the resilience of the human spirit. Slowly, I began to fill my house with my own life. I painted the living room a calming shade of sage green, a color my mother had always called drab. I hung my own charcoal drawings on the walls, the ones I had kept hidden in sketchbooks for years. They were abstract and emotional, and they were mine. I bought a new, beautiful ceramic pie dish, and I baked an apple crumble pie, my own favorite, filling the kitchen with the warm, sweet scent of cinnamon and baked fruit. I ate a slice while it was still warm, standing at my kitchen counter, and it tasted like freedom. I created new routines that belonged only to me. I would wake with the sun and drink my coffee on the back porch, listening to the birds. I started a small garden in the backyard, sinking my hands into the rich, dark earth, feeling a sense of connection to something real and growing. I adopted a cat from the local shelter, a scruffy, one-eyed ginger tomcat who I named Gus. The quiet of the house was now filled with his contented purring, a constant comforting presence. One Sunday afternoon, about 2 months after the final post, I was sitting in my sun-drenched living room, reading a book with Gus asleep on my lap. The house was peaceful. The yellow chrysanthemums from the Millers were in full bloom on the windowsill. A stack of supportive letters sat on the coffee table. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me, so deep and encompassing that it was almost startling. The anger was gone. The grief had softened into a dull, distant ache, like the memory of a long-healed injury. There was no bitterness, no desire for revenge. There was only this quiet, this light, this peace. I thought about my family, not with rage, but with a kind of clinical pity. They were trapped in a dark, airless system of their own making, a world of jealousy and scorekeeping and conditional love. They would likely never escape it. They had lost a daughter, a sister, a source of unwavering support. And what had I lost? I had lost a lifetime of pain. I had lost the crushing weight of their expectations and the sharp sting of their disappointment. I had lost the exhausting, thankless job of being their emotional and financial caretaker. It was the most wonderful loss of my life. I looked around the beautiful room, at the life I was building from the ashes of the one that had been prescribed to me. This house was my fortress, my sanctuary, and my home. It wasn't built to impress them or to win their approval. It was built for me. It was built to hold my peace, to nurture my spirit, and to keep me safe. I leaned my head back against the sofa, a small, genuine smile gracing my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. And I whispered the words into the quiet, sunlit air, a final, gentle declaration to myself. This home isn't for them. It's for me. They thought refusing me would break me. Instead, I built walls they'll never enter, Have you ever had to shut the door on family? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe.